Democratic Whip.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague from Arizona, originally from Chicago, for taking the time to come this morning to the floor of the Senate. Let me also thank the presiding officer and the staff who have weathered this experience as we consider the nomination of Russell Vought for the Office of Management and Budgeting. I know it's been a personal and demanding sacrifice on their part, and I thank them for being here. Why are we doing this? We're hoping to call attention to this nomination. Most people in America, if asked, would not be able to identify the initials OMB, Office of Management and Budgeting. And if they could identify it as a federal agency, they'd be hard-pressed to describe what it does. I've been in politics and congressional government for a number of years. I have an insight into what the agency can do, and I want to tell you that the head of the OMB, though not a very well-known figure across America, has more power than almost anyone in the president's cabinet. This person decides the policy and spending that supports it across the federal government, and it can make a serious difference. Russell Vought has had a chance to show America what he will do if given another chance to head the OMB. You see, in the final 2 years of the first Trump administration, he had the same job. So we saw him in action, and we saw what his philosophy might be. I want to read you something which sounds incredible, but I'm afraid is true, from a press release by the Union of Concerned Scientists. Here's what they wrote in their position paper, branding Russell Vought as a dangerous choice to head the OMB. Quote, as director of the OMB under President Trump's first term, Vought would occupy a powerful position over federal agencies and the federal civilian workforce. Here's what Vought had to say in 2023 about his intentions for these hardworking civil servants under a second Trump administration. And I'm now quoting Russell Vought. We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they're increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma. End of quote, Russell Vought, what he would do if head of the OMB. Honest to God, is that what we want in America? A person who takes a look at federal employees that do a myriad of responsible tasks in our federal government and treat them as villains, traumatize them. For Mr. Vought, this sounds like a political game. But for many of these people, first it's their lives, their careers that they've dedicated to their country and their government to do the best they can, and some critical jobs, which we may take for granted on a regular basis until that moment when we realize how important they'll be. It was just a few weeks ago when we had a horrible plane crash near Washington National Airport. I followed that closely because I will tell you literally, I have flown that flight pattern 1,000 times, 1,000. I return home to Illinois every week that I served in the House, 14 years, and in the United States Senate, now 28 years. So I know that piece of real estate pretty well. Planes come down the Potomac River to avoid noise in the city of Washington, and some have to make a rather abrupt turn into the runway 33 that is available to them. This evening of the accident, an American Airlines plane made the turn and came into contact with an Army helicopter. 67 people died. We checked to see what was going on with air traffic control, and we realized that the air traffic controller was doing double duty that night. He had to do not only the civilian side, but the military side. It's not beyond a person's capacity, but it's not preferable. There should have been more air traffic controllers on the job. Air traffic controllers are federal employees, Mr. Vought. Want to traumatize our air traffic controllers? I don't. I want to feel safe in an airplane. I want to be able to travel with my family with the comfort knowing that a professional who works for the federal government is doing his or her job well. And of course, if you're going to traumatize and call them villains and make them the object of your political fantasies, that's what you get with Mr. Vought and the OMB. It's not fair. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the American people. These people who work in our federal government do responsible, important jobs day in and day out. My staff advised me yesterday that this is reaching a point where no one seems to be in control. They've decided to save money by eliminating the publication of public health brochures that are put out regularly on a weekly basis to notify people all around the United States and the world of outbreaks of illnesses and diseases that could be dangerous. For the first time since 1961, we've stopped publishing those in the last 2 weeks. The Trump administration has decided to, quote, save money, close quote, by reducing the information available to medical professionals all over the world. They used to look to us and count on us every single week to put out this publication. We stopped doing it, quote, to save money, close quote. I'm afraid the day is going to come where we regret that decision and a lot of things that flow from it. I want to say a word, too, about the Department of Justice. Yesterday, I had an individual come to see me who is seeking to be the Deputy Attorney General. Good fellow, I've never met him before, and he talked about his career in the law and what he had done as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. His resume is certainly strong. And I asked him a question. When he worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office, was he given assignments or did he choose his caseload? Oh, he said, when you're brand new, you take what they send you. Put me to work on files and cases as they wish. And I did them willingly. That was my job as a member of the Department of Justice. So I said, you had no really personal decision over these cases. You just did what you were given to, by your superiors. And he said, that's exactly right, and that's how it works. And I said, would it be fair to say that when it came to the assignment of these cases, some hierarchy made that decision, not yourself? He said, of course. I said, do you know what's going on in the Department of Justice now? They're asking the employees of the Department of Justice to fill out a questionnaire. The Trump administration wants to know, did you play any role in the prosecution of those accused of violence here in the Capitol on January 6, 2021? And clearly this is being done to separate out those who prosecuted those thugs who came into this building and attacked us. I don't know where this is going to lead. We're going to have to watch it closely, but it's not been done before. If they are dismissed, terminated, it's fundamentally unfair. As this individual who wants to be part of the Trump administration told me, he had nothing to say about the assignment. He did what he was told, and he did the best job he could. And now to fire these individuals because of the January 6 rioters is just fundamentally unfair. Mr. President, you're new to this chamber, and I've been here a while. And I'll tell you that day, January 6, 2021, is one that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I was sitting at this seat on the floor of the Senate. Vice President Pence was the presiding officer. We were going about our responsibility under the Constitution to count the electoral votes and to announce who won the presidential election. It's a rather routine assignment in the past, and people haven't noticed, but it's taken on new importance and attracted more attention now because of disputes over votes in various states. 2020 was one of the most graphic examples of that, when President Trump announced afterwards that he did not lose the election, that it was stolen. And he gathered together his supporters who believed that point of view into a rally on January 6th on the Capitol Mall. Thousands of people showed up at the president's invitation, and he invited them to come to the Capitol and go wild. They sure did. They went wild by beating down the doors, breaking the windows, crashing through the doors, coming into the United States Capitol building while we were meeting here. Vice President Pence, at about 2:10 p.m., I saw him turn to one of the Secret Service agents who was protecting him, and the agent grabbed his arm and pulled him out of the chair you're sitting in right now. took him off the floor, and we were sitting here with no one presiding. Chuck Grassley, President Pro Tem, was going to take the chair, and a member of the Capitol Hill Police instead walked up to where you're sitting and announced to all the senators in the chamber and their staff people to stay in this room. This was going to be a protected room, a safe room, and that other people were going to join us. Meanwhile, outside you could hear the roar of the crowd as they were crashing through the doors and beating up on Capitol Hill policemen. We were here for about 10 minutes when the same Capitol Hill policeman came up and said, "Change of plans. We can't keep this room safe. Grab your belongings and leave quickly through that door," which we did. We went to a building nearby and waited to see what would happen next. I was part of the leadership that was called to a secure location, and I was with Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi as we followed the proceedings of what was happening on the floor. It was a horrible scene. We were able to see the Senate chamber through C-SPAN and realize that the thugs who were taking over the building were sitting in your chair, going through my desk, posing for pictures, jumping off the balconies. It was a scene you couldn't imagine. It was sickening to me. This building means something to me. It's been an important part of my life. I went to college here in Washington, and I used to come up on my assignments of my part-time job and get a chance to steal away for a few minutes and sit in the gallery and follow what was going on the Senate floor. Just to be in this building I considered a privilege, and I still do. And here were these people doing horrible things in the building and beating up on the Capitol policemen and the DC policemen who were trying to keep us safe. That was the reality of what happened. These people who work for the Senate and the House are federal employees. In Russell Vought's view, the villains, that's what he calls them, risking their lives to keep us safe and being called villains by Russell Vought. For goodness sakes, has he no sense of responsibility for the men and women and their families who risked their lives for this building? Those who were prosecuted for this ended up being in the hundreds of individuals, some for misdemeanors, for trespass, others for more serious crimes, assaulting police officers. One of them already has been released by a pardon from President Trump and went on to defy a policeman in Indiana, and there was a gunfight that followed, and this individual was shot dead on the scene just a few days after he was released by the president's pardon. The point I'm trying to make is that there are important and serious jobs taking place here in Washington and around the nation. We count on federal employees, and we count on people to be held accountable if they violate the law. I am sickened by the fact that these men and women in uniform, whom I've come to know over the years, are considered to be disposable, dispensable. In my mind, they're not. Their lives are worth something, and those who attack them should be held responsible. So when the wheels of justice turned and these individuals were held responsible, it was through the Department of Justice. Now, there is a hunt on in the department to find out each and every one of their names. If they're going on a list to be terminated, I would just say to the Trump administration, you're in for a fight. These men and women did their jobs. They were responsible for prosecuting the individuals who raided this Capitol, and they did it well, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sad to report that Kash Patel, who is President Trump's nominee to head up the Federal Bureau of Investigation, does not agree with me, and I'll tell you why. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has 28,000 federal agents around the world, 400 different field offices. These individuals are the premier law enforcement agency of the United States of America and have an international reputation. Mr. Patel wants to be the person to head that agency. And yet what he decided to do, this Kash Patel, was to make a project out of music from those who were convicted of crimes on January 6, 2021. He gathered together a number of them. He swears that he doesn't even know their names, and created a recording, a song that he wrote, and proudly played at President Trump's rallies by the the song to be sung by the prisoners, and they called it the J6 Choir. As we asked Mr. Patel to tell us more about this, he said, well, all the proceeds from that album would go to the families of the prisoners. I said, did you ever consider the proceeds going to the families of the men and women in uniform who were risking their lives to keep this building safe? No, he said, he focused on the families of the prisoners. He called them political prisoners. Of course, they were convicted under the court of law. Many of them pled guilty. They couldn't deny the fact what the videotape showed of their conduct. So Mr. Patel was raising money through this recording being played at the Trump rallies of these individuals. He said he just didn't know their names or who they might be. And we're considering this individual to head up the FBI. What would morale be like at the FBI if a person is put in charge who was entertaining America with songs by the prisoners in jail who raided this Capitol? I often think, I wonder what we would have thought if the tables were turned a little bit on January 6th and it didn't happen here in Washington, but happened in London. If we heard that a mob had crashed down the doors of Parliament and taken control of the House of Commons, my reaction would have been, it's impossible. I've been there, I've seen that. It's carefully guarded and watched, and it's a venerable institution when it comes to parliamentary law. I can't imagine that a mob would take over the House of Commons in London. Well, think about America, and think about the impression of what happened on January 6th to other people around the world, that this happened in our time, in this building. We have to go back to the War of 1812 to find an invasion of an enemy force. And now we come to January 6, 2021, the so-called political prisoners, some call them tourists, who came in and desecrated this building. That was the reality. I'm only making that point because I think it's a serious historic event and one that we'll think about many times again. And individuals who were involved in that were federal employees, excuse me, and they were doing their job and risking their lives in the process for doing it. So what is going on through the Office of Management and Budgeting? There's a man named Matthew Vaeth, V-A-E-T-H, who issued an order to call for a freeze on federal spending not that long ago, 2 weeks or so. I don't know if he thought through what he was doing, but he said he was doing it to make sure that there would be no federal spending which would support transgenderism. That was one of them. Or what he called Marxian, capital M, Marxian equity, or some Green New Deal. So he wanted to make sure there was no political investment in those causes across America. Do you know what he shut down? He shut down a Head Start program in Chicago, Illinois. It's called El Valor. It's been in business for many years. Families of moderate income that live in the neighborhood send their kids to this Head Start program and are very proud of the results. These kids are learning how to read, they're learning how to socialize, they're going to be ready for kindergarten and ready for school as a result of it. Well, Mr. Vaeth, OMB, decided to shut it down and to cut off their funds. And at least overnight, there was a fear that that's exactly what would happen. It was only when there was a national response in opposition to that that they reversed their position and decided to keep some of the things open. Head Start is open in Chicago that I just mentioned, but there are others that are questioning whether they're open as well. I got a phone call as well from some doctors in Chicago during this shutdown, this OMB shutdown under President Trump. And I said, what impact has this had on you? They said, we're researchers for the National Institutes of Health. We work in laboratories looking for cures for diseases, heart disease, cancer, all sorts of different challenges. And we frankly were told at 5 p.m. on the day of his order to stop working on what we're doing. Most of the projects that we're involved in are long-term projects involving a lot of work that goes beyond regular work hours. But we were told to stop medical research because of this order from the federal government that came out of the OMB. So when we consider what happened just a few days ago, and it's still reverberating around the country, and consider the nomination of Russell Vought, you have to ask yourself, honest to goodness, Do you consider that to be a villain who's working at that laboratory in Chicago for a National Institutes of Health project? I consider that person to be a great professional, and I wish them all the success and luck in the world. To characterize them as villains, as Mr. Vought has done, is unfair to them and an indication of his values. So we are trying to appeal to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join us with a few votes to stop Mr. Russell Vought from taking over the Office of Management and Budgeting. This is an important responsibility, and it's one that needs to be left in the hands of those who will accept that responsibility personally. I see that my colleague has joined me from Maryland. I'm glad she is here. I'm going to wrap up by just saying that we're going to rue the day if we put Russell Vought in this job as to what he's going to do. When he characterizes our federal employees as villains and says we want to put them in trauma, do you want our air traffic controllers to be in trauma? Do you want the men and women who are responsible at the FBI for keeping our country safe from terrorism to be in trauma? I want them working for America's future as they have in the past, and to characterize them as the enemies is unfair. I'll be voting against Russell Vought, and I hope other colleagues will join me. I yield the floor.